Decision by the Staten Island grand jury defied common sense.
Anger from a coalition of black civil rights leaders after a New York grand jury doesn't indict a white police officer.
The decision, then protests across the nation, including thousands in South Florida who saw the videotape and demand consequence.
Demonstrators are calling for a federal investigation and changes in the criminal justice system and better training of police.
Good Sunday morning. So good to have you with us, as always. For the second time in as many weeks, a grand jury has decided not to indict a police officer in the death of an unarmed man, and this time recorded for all to see.
And that video of a white officer putting Eric Garner in a lethal chokehold sparked debate and demonstrations here in South Florida and across the country. In Miami on Friday night, hundreds of demonstrators poured out of the Design District onto Interstate 195, bringing traffic to a standstill. And last night, demonstrators marched in Fort Lauderdale. In both cities, protesters did not resort to violence and police showed restraint. That, however, has not always been the case.
In fact, in one series of incidents, Miami officers shot and killed 7 black men in separate incidents a few years ago, prompting an investigation by the U.S. Justice Department and a compliance plan.
And Miami Police Chief Manuel Orosa implemented the reforms called for by DOJ, and under his leadership, relations have improved between Miami police and black residents.
H.T. Smith is a respected Miami lawyer who's been a leader in the fight for equal justice under the law. He led Miami's tourism boycott in the 80s after Miami politicians snubbed South African freedom fighter Nelson Mandela. He also helped craft the agreement that led to more jobs for African Americans and the first black-owned hotel on Miami Beach.
And Chief Dwayne Flournoy heads the police department in Hallandale Beach. He is a native of Broward, and he began his police career as a street patrol officer in 1987. He was named the Hallandale Police Chief 3 years ago. To all of you, gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So great to have you come in. H.T. Smith, let me just get you on the record. We, all of us, and the world now has seen the video of Eric Garner being taken down in that chokehold and then held down on the ground saying, "I can't breathe," and no one seems to be held accountable. Does that offend your sense of justice?
Well, it does. And right now, all across America, on shows like yours, and in coffee rooms and restaurants around the country, people are saying, and kitchen tables, people are looking at 3 questions. 1, do black lives matter? 2, are police officers above the law? And 3, can we come together, blacks, whites, Hispanics, and others, and bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice in the issue of race so that we can have a more perfect union? And that's why you see young people out in the street, because they believe that they can bend the arc of justice.
As Martin Luther King famously said,
yes,
the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice, but it takes a very long time.
And they want to speed it up.
Yeah.
And you just framed our whole discussion in those 3 points here today. But the 2 incidents in the last 2 weeks, let's talk about the Michael Brown and Ferguson incident and the incident in Staten Island on tape. These are very different incidents. How do you see them being lumped together in what is now nationwide protests over some very specific requests?
Well, first of all, most people are very supportive of police, and the overwhelming majority of police officers protect and serve our community in a very professional way. However, the question becomes, are we going to protect those police who do not patrol communities the way they should? Police should have a tremendous amount of discretion to make life and death decisions. It's easy for us sitting here to second guess a police officer. And so the Michael Brown situation is a situation that's different, in my judgment, from the situation that happened in New York, because you've got to give police officers the benefit of the doubt when their life is at stake and you've got to make a quick decision. Right. What happened, though, for the first time, all of America got to see a situation and then say, he did something wrong. Okay, he needs to be punished, and there's no punishment. And then the police union comes and says, our officer did not put him in a chokehold. So people are saying, wait a minute, we're seeing a chokehold. and they're telling us no chokehold. What happens when there's no cameras?
Yeah, he said it was a wrestling move, but Chief Arosa, let me get your take on this. You obviously saw that video from the cell phone in Staten Island. When you saw that, did you think the police officer, all the officers, there were, what, 3 or 4 of them, do you think that the officer Pantaleo who put Garner in the chokehold, it looked like a chokehold to me, I'm a layman, was that proper police procedure?
No, it's not. Number one, when I saw the video, I thought someone was going to be indicted from that video. But I understand the grand jury had issues of who actually caused the death of Mr. Gardner. But I think in a federal situation, most of those officers will probably be indicted, whether they are found guilty or not.
For civil rights violations.
Correct. It's going to be more difficult. But I saw it and I said, well, this at least will calm what's going on in Ferguson because he's going to get indicted. But then I was surprised when he did not get indicted. Yeah. Proper procedures? No. Chokeholds are against policies in most police departments, including ours, and more than likely the officer will be fired for putting that chokehold on.
Chief Flournoy, you and I sort of have an email thing going yesterday, and you brought up something very interesting, the difference between appropriate use of force and justified use of force. What do you mean by that?
Well, legally, in most cases, when officers are using deadly force, they're going to be justified. But sometimes when
justified legally.
But sometimes we have to look at what led up to that use of force. What began that encounter, and was that appropriate? Could we have done something different? And the one thing I would say is that I think the public would be amazed as officers go out and do their daily responsibilities, and the discretion that we use to not use a great deal of deadly force. But taking someone into custody is extremely difficult. And it's force on force. And it doesn't look pretty. And it's not pretty. It's violence on violence. And when you get an opportunity to look at that video, it's distressing because for a very relative minor law violation, someone in your custody dies. That's concerning.
But what's so concerning about that is they took down this man who had his hands up, who was not resisting. We watched that. And I think that begs the question, no one is saying police officers have a horrific experience going into a situation they know nothing about. They could be dead in an instant, and we've seen that, and I think we need to be mindful of that. But when you watch something like what happened in Staten Island with a man who, whether he was doing something wrong or not aside, there was no resistance. His hands were up. He was actually pleading for his life at one point. I can't breathe. That becomes the question. What is the procedure to take someone down when you don't have to do something so injurious?
Well, it's typically some type of takedown where it requires some level of force. But what I would have liked to see is stepping back from that and realizing that we're dealing with an individual that's selling cigarettes. That's what we're dealing with.
It's a tax violation. It is a very minor violation. But in fact, this goes to the whole theory of the broken windows approach to policing. I see you nodding your head, HT, which I guess began with Mayor Giuliani in New York, where they said, for the slightest offense, we are going to be proactive, and crime as a result, in fact, in New York became one of the safest big cities in the country. Chief Arosa, does the Miami PD follow a broken windows theory of policing?
Most police departments do, because it does give you results in crime, and crime does go down. The issue is your actions. Even though they may be justified, are those actions necessary? And sometimes those actions are not necessary. In a lot of police-involved shootings, the officers turn out to be justified at the end, but was the shooting necessary? Could it have been done a different way? And the thing with Eric Gardner, could it have been done a different way? officers just tackle Eric Gardner, leg sweeps, put him to the ground. The chokehold looks horrific on TV. The issue is, I understand he died from chest compressions.
Right.
If you take him down with leg sweeps or whatever and cuff him, would it turn out to be a different situation? Maybe, maybe not, but we'll never know
Yeah,
that.
he was asthmatic. A lot of
Exactly.
things that the officers didn't know at the time, and yet you look at that video, HT, and you say to yourself, this man is saying 11 times, I can't breathe, and yet the officers are down there kneeling on his back, and they continue to restrain him.
I give the police benefit of the doubt with regard to the takedown. I used to represent the E. Wilson Purdy and the Public Safety Department, which is now called Miami-Dade Police Department. But once he's down, the police know that if you have a big man like that and you have him stomach down, you cut off his breathing. That's number one.
Right.
Number two, you have his face down on the pavement, which also cuts off the breathing along with the chokehold. So the question everybody's asking is, okay, you felt you did your job, but when does your humanity come into state? Even after they had him in custody, they still didn't try to provide him any kind of care whatsoever and watched him die. A human being. Does black life matter?
And that's a question of how is use of force, appropriate, justified, or whatever, applied equally among the communities. This is something we're going to talk about when we come right back. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about race relations, police procedures. Chief Dwayne Flournoy from Hallandale Beach, Chief Manuel Arosa from City of Miami, H.T. Smith, veteran Miami lawyer and civil rights worker, and H.T. We've talked about community policing. I know both of these departments do community policing, get into the neighborhoods, learn the people that they're working with. What is the breakdown with this very important component of policing that the neighborhoods, many of them, just do not trust police?
Well, a big part of what makes successful policing is for people to believe that the police are there to protect and serve and not just to occupy the community. And so a lot of things they do, whether it's the Police Athletic League, whether it's toys and things for Christmas, and knowing the people in the community, has that trust and that bond. So you just can't go to people in times of discomfort and controversy. If you've developed a relationship beforehand, you can go to the people in the community. They will listen to you. They will work with you. But more importantly, they will trust you. And what we saw in our community with regard to these recent demonstrations is something that good police chiefs and good political leaders have learned, that where you make peaceful protests impossible, you make violent protests inevitable. And we can commend those who are in power who were involved in that, because they allowed people to express their constitutional rights to protest, and they did it with professionalism, they did it with restraint, and they did it with the community. They protected the community, they protected businesses, they protected those who were being affected, and they protected those who were protesting. That's policing at its best.
And I think that Friday night, what we saw in the city of Miami, when a couple of hundred demonstrators poured from the design district up onto 195, Chief Arosa, I think your officers, and let's show some of the video, because people were inconvenienced who were on their way on a Friday night going to Art Basel, Miami Beach, or doing other things. But none of these demonstrators whom we see here was violent. There wasn't any property destroyed. And the police were there, but they showed great restraint. Was that your policy, Chief Arosa?
Yeah, our situation that night was that allow people to have their say in the middle of the street, let them vent, let them do their demonstration, let them say whatever they want to say, and at the end of the day, I wanted everybody to go home in a peaceful situation. We were prepared if something were to happen to protect everything that was going on in Art Basel. We had plenty of resources, but if you want to go shut down the street as form of protest, then citizens will become inconvenienced. But that's the message these protesters want to do. They want to put out their message so that people listen to them. And as long as nobody gets hurt, I'm all for it. You know, America was created under the rule of, if you don't like what your government's doing, then, you know, talk about it and be open about it and move forward.
There was something called the Boston Tea Party, I
Exactly.
believe, which was a demonstration, and it helped produce a great country.
But I think what's important is that the protests and demonstrations are important, but that's just the genesis of getting to the problem. Because once the protests and the demonstrations stop, it's time for us to sit down and have a serious talk about police and police relations, the African American community and the police community. And the African American community has to be able to come to the table and give us an opportunity. We know there's distrust there, but if we don't come to the table, all we're going to continue to do is have demonstrations and protests.
Do you think it needs to be a larger conversation, not just from that the police part is sort of the end game? Does there need to be a real look at the criminal justice system from the bottom up? For instance, Senator Bullard, who was here last week, he has advanced this bill to make marijuana possession either legal, essentially not take the ability away to make this probable cause to go stop someone, because most of the people arrested for that are African American. So if you look at the justice system from components like this from the bottom up, is the black community at a disadvantage from the get-go, and don't we need to address that?
Well, absolutely. We need to address that and a lot of other issues. One of the main things we need to address in light of what happened in Ferguson and in Staten Island is, how do we investigate accusations of police misconduct? It is just an inexcusable conflict of interest to have the prosecutor's office investigating the police that they have to work with every day. I was the police lawyer for 2 years, and I'll tell you, I try to be fair, but I was really on the side of the police. Every day I was helping the police. I should not be the one making those decisions. It needs to be someone who is a neutral, detached magistrate. That's number one. By the way, I wanted to make sure before I left here today that said that prosecutor who was not able to get an indictment in Staten Island with a videotape of the crime, he needs to be disbarred for incompetence that will never be reversed. And also the police, I hope, will take some action. Although they said there was no crime involving state law, he still violated the police procedures, and I hope they take some disciplinary action.
You know, can I just bring up sort of a visual? I don't know if your department has, I know, does Miami have or Hallandale Beach have those big war machines, the militaristic vehicles? I know Miami Gardens has a supply. A lot of police departments around the nation are now getting surplus war machines, and I think the perception in the communities is you want to community police, you want to see officer friendly, but then you see these war machines coming in, and the perception may be, well, there's money for all of this material, but where's the money for job training? Where's the money for education? Does that send a mixed message in your community?
I think in deploying those federal programs that bring in equipment to local police departments, they have their benefits, but I think what's been missing is a lot of smaller departments didn't have proper policies in place, when to use them, how to use them. So we have one, but yes, we have a policy. There's only 3 individuals that can authorize that vehicle to be moved from its setting station, and that's me, a SWAT commander, and another high-ranking official. No one else can move that vehicle,
Well, that
so it needs
sounds like
policies.
Sounds like a reasonable policy. Chief Arosa, I just have to ask you, and I want Chief Flournoy to weigh in as well. After the no indictment situation in Staten Island, at roll call, and I've been to some of your roll call meetings, did the lieutenant or sergeant, whoever was conducting roll call, take a minute to say something, or a couple of minutes to say something to the patrol officers?
The message was sent out that even though the officer was not indicted, please patrol your communities with the utmost safety. Understand that people are going to be upset, and understand that situation. Don't get involved in a back and forth discussion as to what happened in Staten Island. Staten Island is 1,000 miles or more away from here, so it shouldn't get us involved in that situation.
Yeah.
I just want to say something. Dr. Smith said that even though at the end of the day prosecutors will bring indictments against officers and alike on certain situations, there needs to be a sense of transparency. And the easiest way to do that is for establishing some type of protocol. Then when there is a controversial situation involving a police officer, that maybe not that prosecutor, but a prosecutor assigned by the governor, not only in this state but other states,
to guarantee transparency and independence.
Well,
All right.
one of the other things we know very quickly, we know that Chief Aroso is about to go into greener pastures. I would hope that the conversation would start while he's here, and he can transfer his goodwill and trust that he has in the community. Whoever the next chief is, it will make it much better and easier for the next chief.
Well said.
I'll be around. I'm not. I can help anybody.
All right,
Thanks so
gentlemen.
much.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much. We appreciate it. Still to come, our Powerhouse Roundtable on the same subject: race relations and the police and the court decision. And we're also going to talk about same-sex marriage and the right of couples to marry, perhaps starting January 5th.
Stay with us. Time to take it to the round table. A big week of news in so many ways in Miami-Dade and Broward County.
And we have some of the best and brightest to analyze it all. Bob Jarvis is a law professor at Nova Southeastern University, but his expertise extends well beyond just legal matters. David Young is a Miami attorney specializing in mediation these days, but you may have seen him before on his syndicated TV show, Judge David Young. We may see that again, I hope. Dr. Robert Malone is an educator and community activist and a former candidate for the Miami City Commission. And Dr. Malone, we're glad to welcome you here for the first time.
No, actually, he's been here as a guest before, never on the round table, right?
On the round table.
Yeah.
All right, well, let me, Bob, let me get you to weigh in here on the incident with no indictment on Officer Pantaleo. What is your reaction? Is that a miscarriage of justice?
I think so. The policy and procedures with regard to chokeholds is clearly stated in New York City Police Department. And this chokehold it's illegal. It's outlawed. And clearly, based on what the video showed, the law enforcement officer applied this chokehold. And as you mentioned in the prior segment, that Mr. Gardner said 11 times that he could not breathe. And subsequent to that, Mr. Gardner died. And I don't understand what the confusion is.
That's the whole question. Everybody says, when you see something on tape, where is the confusion? But as everyone in the legal field knows, once you get something in front of a jury, it's not all of that black and white. And I don't mean to use a pun. It's just not all clearly what you see on tape. There's levels. Talk about what levels, what standards a police maneuver, police procedure needs to rise to be considered a potential crime.
Well, I mean, the officer said that it was not his intent to hurt Mr. Gardner and that all he was trying to do, he of course says that he didn't use a chokehold, that he used a wrestling maneuver to take him down. What's clear, though, is however Mr. Gardner got to the ground, once he was on the ground, they should have quickly cuffed him, and then they should have quickly gotten him up, because the real problem is when he's on the ground, he's not able to breathe.
Well, in the mid-90s, I have read that the Department of Justice issued guidelines to all federal agencies and recommendations to local police agencies saying that in a takedown situation, as soon as the suspect has been cuffed, get that person off his or her stomach, sit them up, and clearly in this case, and we're looking at the video again, that did not happen. And then it was exacerbated when the EMTs arrived on the scene. They didn't provide CPR to this guy.
But the problem is, okay, we've all seen it, and we've seen how horrendous the police action was. But what we're not focusing on is the grand jury system. And what the people don't understand out there is that the grand jury system is not a jury of your peers. There's no one in the jury room questioning the jurors. They are selected by a judge and by a list. They get seated, and the only person in that grand jury room is the prosecutor. So if the prosecutor feeds you X, Y, and Z, then you're going to believe X, Y, and Z. If he or she wants to tell you that the police officer was a wonderful person, that the police officer was in fear of his life, and the guy had a record as big as the state of Florida, what is the grand jury going to do? So that's what the people need to understand out there, is that it's a grand jury system. It's not a jury of your peers, because that's a completely different standard that we have in the United States. And we're, by the way, we're one of the only countries that has the grand jury standard.
But even in front of a jury of peers, there is no, in fact, in the Lozano case from the mid-1990s, a Miami officer, William Lozano, who was convicted of shooting a black man on a motorcycle and killing him before that was overturned. And in a second trial, the rules became, in this state, police procedure all of a sudden is not a public record. So the jury of your peers may not be able to see the evidence of why
or
an
hear
officer
testimony
or hear
about
testimony,
it.
why
But
police do what they do.
It's not a jury of your peers. This is a selected group of individuals. You don't have a lawyer in questioning the jurors. You didn't have a lawyer in there questioning the police officer and saying, isn't it true, sir, that you did X, Y, and Z? Isn't it true, sir, that you gave a chokehold? Isn't it true that you witnessed it and did nothing about it? If the jury knew all of that, Michael and Glenna, then I guarantee you there would have been an indictment. And I think we really need to review the grand jury system, and is it still working, and is it giving justice to the people that demand justice?
And Bob Jarvis, who can change the grand jury system? Is that legislative? Is that for the judicial system itself? How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated question, but I think the judge is right that the grand jury system, which has its pros in other settings, doesn't really work for these kinds of cases. These kinds of cases, what we really need is accountability and transparency, and the way you get transparency is to take this out of the grand jury room and put it in front of a judge so that everybody can see what's going on.
And you think that's what Robert, the protests, we watch the protests, we hear the yelling. What is it protesters want? What would make their questions answered?
Look, unfortunately in New York City, we've had several types of these type of incidents, Louima, Diallo, and you have the situation, this historical text of what has happened, where individuals, African American or Hispanics, are treated in a certain kind of way, and then when it goes to the grand jury or law enforcement, somehow a list of their crimes are being placed in the media. So to justify this type of activity or behavior to happen, and I think the protesters are a reflection of that. I think some are in our community and in the black community are getting tired of seeing this kind of injustice take place, where you have individuals whose background is being undermined or mischaracterized, and it's justifying their death. I think that's a problem.
And doesn't that go back to what we were talking about earlier, in that the whole criminal justice system from the ground up may be institutionally skewed?
And I believe you can see what happens. I think at some point, minority communities want to see someone indicted when an African American or Hispanic or someone from the minority community is killed in such a manner like this.
Or anybody.
I know that, but I think that when they see this type of injustice, it takes them back to other examples, and they say, when is it going to happen?
Yeah, David, you're a former judge and you're a good lawyer, so let me ask you, the article in the Miami Herald this morning, a very good article by David Ovalle, which pointed out the history of the William Lozano case, the Miami police officer that Glenna mentioned, who shot and killed the guy on the motorcycle, a young black man in Overtown. When the 3rd District Court of Appeal overturned that and said that the jury shouldn't have heard about police training and so on, and that there should have been a change of venue. Since 1989, no police officer in the state of Florida has been charged with a crime in relation to use of force in the performance of his or her duties. I mean, since 1989, no police officer has made a mistake and inadvertently even killed somebody, hurt them, and has not been charged.
Well, I think you have a lot of institutional racism all throughout the justice system. People who say, I'm really not racist, but when it comes down to their actions, they really are racist. They may not understand that concept, but they are. I think what really needs to happen, Michael, is I think we need, let's take the protesters that just took place in Miami. There was over 600 people protesting the criminal justice system. What happened? How many of those 600 people actually voted in an election? We had 35% of our voters. Now, members of every community, whether it's in Ferguson or whether it's in New York, Staten Island, or Miami, when you vote for a prosecutor, someone to uphold the law and enforce the law, you need to be careful who you vote for. Not everyone is like a Kathy Rundle or Mike Satz that we have here who are really, really responsible individuals. But you need to find out who you vote for, why you vote for them, and get out and support the people who you know will defend
Be
your
engaged.
rights.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point to get to a break. Stay with us. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
In our studio live this morning, three distinguished members of our community: Bob Jarvis from Nova Southeastern University Law School, Judge David Young, Dr. Robert Malone, educator, teacher, civic activist. Bob Jarvis, this week the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta refused to lift or extend the stay, rather, that Judge Hinkle in Tallahassee had imposed in the same-sex marriage case. And it appears that on January 6th, same-sex couples in marriage in Florida are going to be able to marry. Now, is that the way you read the legal procedure?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. Unless something happens between now and January 6th, absolutely.
Well, what can happen? Because there's always something legally that can happen.
I mean, I guess that Pam Bondi can try to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, but, you know, I think we're going to have same-sex marriage on January 6th.
Yeah, well, the reason, and David, maybe you saw this article in the Herald this morning, and apparently
I did.
The attorneys at Greenberg, Traurig, and Tallahassee said maybe it applies only to the clerks in the counties where the plaintiffs have gone and made the defendants the county clerk who refused to issue the marriage license. But, I mean...
and they also said in that article that they're reviewing their opinion, which was based on in July the 1st. I think that the clerk's offices from around the state of Florida, unless Pam Bondi goes there wearing a bikini saying, please don't do it,
That will
it's going to
lead
happen.
our 6 o'clock news. That will be the lead of our newscast.
That really will. No, the 11th Circuit was clear, and the Supreme Court was clear also when another series of states took the issue up to them, and by 7-2 vote said, no, we're not going to delay anymore. We're going to let the states, conduct same-sex marriage, which makes me very happy. But of course, we're getting married on December 21st in New York City because everything was planned at the time. But we're looking forward to it.
All right,
It's not often we have someone with a personal stake in a big issue sitting in our round table.
Thank you.
It's
After 20 years, it's nice.
You know, many of
That's
the
great.
people who were fighting, trying to keep the ban, are many of the same people who, at least locally, showed up at the Miami-Dade Commission earlier this week and were fighting the Commission's attempt to add transgender people to the umbrella of the human rights protections. And what was very interesting, which they did, as a matter of fact,
8-3.
8-3. These opponents wore badges that said "Stop the Discrimination," and I didn't really get that at all because they felt discriminated against. Do you get that?
Yeah, and there are very disparaging words have been said about transgender individuals that it's going to lead to more rapes and child molestations and every kind of thing. I just think that's the wrong way to handle it.
Well, what it turned out to be, the argument was all about bathrooms.
Yeah,
Who would use what bathroom? And it was a very serious, heartfelt fear that these people had about being in a bathroom with someone that they weren't sure about.
And the conversation, that's where the statements came in with regard to going to the restroom and you have to be careful and they're dangerous individuals and that kind of thing. And I think that kind of language it really does not.
It's hurtful.
It's
It was
hurtful. It is.
Yeah, I'd like to give a little shout out to Miami-Dade Commissioner Audrey Edmondson, who I think showed some leadership on this issue and stepped forward, and she was the prime sponsor of this and took some heat for it.
She always has been on the forefront of anti-discrimination. Audrey does an incredible job not only for her constituents but for the community as a whole. It was appalling to me that the fear tactics that were exploited by the individuals in this matter.
That you're looking at right now is one of the flyers that they were sending out.
Yeah.
Speaking of fear tactics.
It's the things that go on in the bathroom. Well, I got to tell you, if I'm in the bathroom with Larry Craig, I'm going to be fearful too. It's just so ridiculous. It's absolutely inane and it's insulting. Discrimination is wrong on every level, and that's why a lot of those people came to the United States of America. They risked their lives coming here for freedom against discrimination, and they ought to be ashamed of themselves. And the three commissioners should be ashamed of themselves for voting the way they did. Disgraceful.
Let's move on, if we can, to the fact that this has been Art Week in Miami.
Really? It has?
Really, Mike?
What?
And,
Where?
Basil? Let me put that for
Basel, yeah. And I was at the Miami Beach Convention Center for the opening, and I've got to say,
Michael's a swell.
I was there as a
Man of
reporter.
many talents.
I was there as a reporter, but boy, I saw some fabulous art. I mean, art you would have had to go to Milan or Florence or New York or Beijing, or I mean, it's just an amazing 260 galleries from 31 countries exhibiting some of the great art, and then there are all these other satellite fairs. I mean, good is the Australians would say, good on us.
Have you been?
I've been to Art Basel and went to different galleries and saw the expensive art that I can't afford. It was unfortunate, though. It was unfortunate that some crime had to be part of it. You know, a plate was stolen. I think it was worth
$80,000.
At Picasso.
Yeah, but again, it's a great event for Miami.
You know what it has become? Not only this one economic engine that is Art Basel for this community, but it's really evolved into so many other sites and so many places that are really doing things for free that people can go by, walk into, look at, really broadening the cultural spectrum.
I think there's 75,000 people that came for this event. The weather has been fabulous. The art and the parties and the excitement in the city is just contagious. And that's what makes Miami an incredible place to live.
And it's happening in a place in Wynwood. 25 years ago, it wasn't that
slum.
It would not have.
10 years ago.
Yeah, well,
it's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I was there for dinner the other night. It's just
it is
incredible.
Yeah, the design district, which was not much to speak of a few years ago, now is a center for this, and Wynwood, it's really exciting.
And Nova has a component of
Yes, it does with the art museum.
Yeah. Robert, before we leave, we've got about a minute left. You and I exchange emails regularly. You are a teacher. You speak to young black men and women, boys and girls. And you sent me, I think, a very moving email when you, after Pedro Uriarte died, and I think you were teaching at the school where Pedro, and you knew him.
Yeah.
And he was shot in the head, and I mean, just an awful thing. Now, when you speak to these kids, what do you say to them?
I tell them life is about choices. You have to make the right choice. And I ask them, look, you're in the community, you live here. The individuals who are involved in crime, is it working for them? And of course, they say no. So that should inform you that the choice is to do something else. And unfortunately, Pedro Overtown was shot in the head over headphones. I mean, and then had another kid that was shot in the pelvis area a month ago at Miami Jackson. So it really is troubling.
Life is about choices.
Yeah, it's life
Wonderful
about
lesson.
choices.
Yeah.
Good point on which to end. Robert Malone, great to have you
Thank
come
you
in.
so much
Robert.
for being
Good
here.
to see you as always, my friend David.
Michael, thank you. Glenda, thank you.
Mazel. All right. Next, a former Broward School Board member is now on trial for charges that she allegedly used her position for personal gain, and Bob Norman is on the case. And now to the latest on a bribery trial involving a former member of the Broward County School Board.
Stephanie Kraft and her husband Mitch are accused of using her elected position to get money from a couple of developers. Bob Norman is covering that trial in Fort Lauderdale.
On the witness stand, the developer admitted he hired then school board member Stephanie Kraft's husband for one reason.
I just contacted him for his influence with his wife.
The developer, Bruce Chait, said he wanted Mitch Kraft on the payroll so he could get a break in hefty development fees from the school board with the help of his wife.
He told me that he wanted $10,000 to basically pull the strings from the background.
For that $10,000, state prosecutors allege Stephanie Kraft then helped get Chait a $500,000 reduction in fees from her board before ducking out on the vote and hiding the fact that her husband had a business relationship with Chait from the public.
Count 2, charges bribery.
Kraft is charged with bribery and 3 other corruption counts, but her attorney Ken Padowitz argues that Mitch Kraft did legal work for Chait and that Chait fabricated the allegations to help cut a deal with prosecutors to keep himself out of prison on his own felony conviction after admitting to bribing numerous politicians, including former County Commissioner Josephus Egliston and suspended Tamarack Mayor Beth Talabisco.
That you were violating Florida law with each person.
No, I honestly didn't, okay? I'm not a lawyer.
Among the remaining witnesses is a who's who of school board officials, including former Superintendent Jim Notter. We'll let you know how this turns out. At the courthouse, I'm Bob Norman, Local 10 News.
Bob, thanks. Mitch Kraft is also facing felony charges, and his case will be tried separately in the coming months. Stephanie Kraft's trial resumes tomorrow.
Still to come today, the tale of the tape. The call to equip police officers with body cameras is loud and under debate. But what took so long? That's next.
And here now is a live look from our Fort Lauderdale Tower Cam. A perfect day for the Dolphins to beat the Ravens.
Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa is here with such a good forecast. This is like no work for you, right?
Exactly. I haven't been that busy. Just some clouds developing over our skies. Glenna, Michael, and South Florida. Enjoy this weather. We're having it for a couple of days. It's beautiful out there in the upper 70s across the area. Homestead has already reached that 80 degree, and that's where we'll stay for this afternoon with northwest winds between 5 to 10 miles per hour. We do have a cold front coming through this afternoon. It's a dry front, but it will bring us a cool down again into tonight and for the next couple of days. If you head out to the beach, we have a low risk of rip currents. No advisories on the water for Miami-Dade, Broward, and the Keys. And yes, it's game day. In about 30 minutes, we have kickoff. Temperatures will be in the upper 80s, or rather upper 70s, close to 80 degrees with a mix of sun and clouds. Will be cooler, especially by Wednesday, waking up to the 50s.
I just want to say, you know, can we all get along? Can we get along?
Almost 24 years ago, the police brutalizing of Rodney King launched a look at how cameras change the course of justice. The man, the bystander who recorded the video of LAPD officers beating King, took it first to police, who didn't take it. He then took it to a news station whose broadcast would change the course of history. A whole tape can tell a whole story, which would be just one benefit of police body cameras or head cameras, a decision now in debate here and across the country. Last week, the lack of consequences for the New York officers involved in Eric Garner's death fueled critics who argue this time, a grand jury was able to watch that chokehold on tape, yet brought no indictment. Tough to say why at this point, as we've been talking about. It may have something to do with confusion about the legal standards to which police actions must rise to be considered criminal. As for cameras, the evidence is hard to ignore. People, police included, alter their behavior when they know they're on camera. Just ask anyone who's been on television. The Rialto, California PD cites an 88% drop in citizen complaints about police behaving badly and a 60% drop in officers' use of force. Those numbers are staggering. But the best argument for cameras is about the evidence they provide. Unblinking, unedited videotape is an unvarnished, indisputable picture that no verbal account can be, without emotion, without agenda. For sure, cameras are not the answer. They are tools, and they come with concerns to address about process and privacy. But like DNA evidence, videotape has a critical role in 21st century criminal justice. What do you think? We invite you to weigh in on any topic you like. Email, Facebook, Twitter, any of those addresses. We are very easy to find.
And as always, we want to remind you to stay informed, get involved.
Have a great Sunday, and go Dolphins.
Go Dolphins. Beat those Ravens.
You know, you've been making fists a lot. I'm wondering what you're doing with those fists.